Hey guys, how's it going? This is WolfPad and welcome to part 2 of my Chess Basics series, where I will teach you everything you need to know in order to start playing chess right away. If you haven't seen the first part, make sure you do that since you'll need the information to understand what we'll cover today. For today's video, we'll be looking into sufficient material, must-know chess terminology, and the principles of chess openings. Let's get started. Now that we know the basics on how the pieces move and capture, we need to know when we have enough of them to be able to checkmate our opponent. This is what we call sufficient material. We briefly mentioned it on part 1. Obviously, when there's lots of pieces on the board for both sides, there will be more than enough to checkmate. But what we're really interested in is when there are very few pieces for one side and no pieces but the king for the other. That's when it can get tricky. The following are the minimal different piece configurations necessary to force checkmate against the lone king. We will be going through the actual technique to checkmate in such scenarios on the next video. First, king and pawn. While it is impossible to checkmate the opponent with only a king and pawn, if we can escort the pawn to the end of the board, it can be promoted to other pieces that can force checkmate on the opponent. So even though pawns are small and may seem relatively underwhelming at the start, during the endgame they become extremely powerful and dangerous. 2. King and queen. This is an easy one, since the queen is the most powerful piece in the game. With his lady at his side, the white king can force black's king into submission relatively easy, but beware of stalemates. 3rd, king and rook. Another basic configuration. The king and rook can coordinate to limit the opponent's move and ultimately deliver checkmate. 4th, king and 2 bishops of opposite colors. This one is less common, but if white happens to have both colored bishops against the black king, he or she can force checkmate by coordinating the bishops to control both type of colors. And last, king, knight, and bishop. One of the trickiest checkmates to pull off, but quite doable. White will look to coordinate both his minor pieces to control both color complexes and force the black king back until finally forcing checkmate. The following scenarios are instances where white has insufficient material to checkmate the opponent, and thus the game is instantly drawn. First, king and knight. Unfortunately, the knight just doesn't quite cut it by himself. If this scenario comes about, the game is immediately drawn. Second, king and bishop. Much like the king and knight, one bishop alone simply doesn't have the firepower to deliver checkmate. Game is also immediately drawn. Remember I emphasized the phrase forced checkmate before? It is because this last scenario is a special one. King and 2 knights. The reason this is special is because white cannot force checkmate on black if black knows how to defend by trying to stay in the middle of the board. But if black gets into a corner at a specific moment, it is possible for the 2 knights and king to deliver checkmate. If black should run out of time here though, the game would be considered a draw since checkmate cannot be forced. There are other instances where one side can help the other side deliver checkmate, even if that side has insufficient material, by using their own pieces to block escape squares for the king. We call this a helpmate, but we won't be covering that yet. One small disclaimer before we continue. There seems to be some controversy between the 2 main chess authorities out there, USCF and FIDE, regarding insufficient material. For our purposes and the purpose of playing online, we'll go with the rules I stated previously. If you want to know more about it though, check the description below for the official rules. Here comes the speed round, so buckle up tightly because we're about to go over some chess terminology. Don't blink or you might miss it. Advantage, when one player is doing better. Active piece, a piece that is doing many things at once. Here, white's bishop is defending the knight, attacking f7, and attacking the rook on a8. It's active. Black bishop ain't doing nothing, so it's not active. Attack, defend, control. All really mean the same thing, but in different situations or for different sides. White's knight is defending the bishop. Black's rook is attacking the bishop. They're both trying to control the square d5. Backwards pawn. A pawn that cannot move and be defended by adjacent pawns. Here, the pawn on c4 cannot move to c5 and be defended by neither the pawn on b4 or d4. Therefore, it is a backwards pawn. Battery. Means that 2 or more long-range pieces, queen, bishop, or rook, are lined up attacking a specific square or area of the board. Bishop pair. Means having both colored bishops. Blockade. Using a piece to block a pawn from having the option to advance. Brilliancy, an awesome move. Blunder, a terrible move, usually means the loss of the game. Center, the immediate center consists of d4, d5, e4, and e5. The broader center includes all of these squares. Closed game, when the center area is clogged up with blocked pawns. Open game, when the center pawns have been exchanged and there is open space. Centralizing, moving a piece closer to the center, usually to increase its mobility. Mobility, how many squares a piece can move to. Friendly pieces or enemy pawns decrease a piece's mobility. Compensation, whenever there is an unequal exchange of pieces, say a bishop for 2 pawns, the side who's down on material could claim compensation on other aspects of the game. Position, king safety, initiative, etc. Here, we see white giving up his bishop for 1 pawn, but getting a powerful attack on black's king as compensation. Check. As explained on the last video, it means a direct attack on the king. A side in check has to deal with it on his or her move before trying to do anything else. Checkmate. Also covered in the previous video, when a king is in check and has no legal moves, he/she is checkmated. A checkmated king results in a loss. Counterplay. When a defending side suddenly finds a way to attack the other player, usually on another area of the board. Here, black is on the defense, but can soon seek counterplay by bringing his rook to white's second rank and threaten the pawns. Critical position. A specific moment in the game that is especially important. A move in a critical position can make or break someone's game. Development. Moving pieces from their starting positions. Doubled pawns. 2 pawns that are on the same file. Isolated pawn. A pawn that is on a file where the 2 adjacent friendly pawns are missing, therefore it cannot be defended by other pawns. Double isolated pawns. 2 pawns that are on the same file but cannot be defended by other pawns. Yikes. Exchange. The capture and recapture of equally valued pieces, minor piece for minor piece, rook for rook, etc. Exchange sacrifice. Exchanging a higher valued piece for a lesser valued piece. Example, a rook for bishop or a rook for knight. Forced move. A move that a side must make either because it's the only legal move or because any other move would result in heavy material loss or losing the game outright. All checks are forcing moves, for example. In between move or Zwischenzug. Basically, moving another piece with a forceful reply before continuing. Here, black is looking to exchange queens, but white can make an in-between move. Knight takes bishop check. Since it's a check, black is forced to move the king and only then does white recapture the queen. Hole. A specific square on the board that no pawns can defend. It can be closely related to backwards pawns. Outpost. A hole in the opponent's position that serves as an excellent home for your pieces. Kingside. The half of the board containing the E, F, G, and H files. Queenside. The half of the board containing the D, C, B, and A files. Opening. The start of the game, where both sides look to develop their pieces and get castled. Middle game. Once both players have mobilized their army, they'll try to come up with a plan to win the game. Endgame. When most pieces have been exchanged, especially queens, and checkmate is going to be harder to achieve with the remaining pieces. Both sides will look to activate their kings and hope for a small advantage. Open file. A file with no pawns in it at all. Semi-open file. A file where your pawn is missing but your opponent's pawn is still there to attack. Closed file. A file containing both your pawn and your opponent's pawn. Passed pawn. A pawn that can no longer be attacked by an enemy pawn. Pawn break. A pawn movement that attacks another pawn and liberates your pieces for greater mobility. Pawn structure. How the pawns are arranged on the board. The pawn structure usually dictates what kind of game it's going to be and what plans the side must implement to be successful. Pawn chain. A pawn structure where pawns support and defend each other. This is considered desirable. Absolute pin. When a long-range piece is attacking the enemy king through another enemy piece, making that piece unable to move. Here, the bishop is pinning the knight to the king. Moving a piece that's on an absolute pin is an illegal move. Relative pin. When a long-range piece is attacking a higher valued piece through a lesser or equal valued piece, making it unwise to move said piece. Moving a piece that's on a relative pin is legal, but not advisable in most situations. Promotion. When a pawn reaches the other side of the board and turns itself into a queen. Under promotion. When a pawn reaches the other side of the board and turns itself into a rook, knight, or bishop. Sacrifice. Giving up a pawn or piece in return for positional or tactical compensation. Space. how much of the board one controls with pawns. The more space one has, the easier it is to move pieces around. Time control, how much time one has to play the game. Trapped piece, a piece that cannot move to any safe squares. Trap, baiting an opponent to make a specific move that seems alluring, but actually results in a great disadvantage or the loss of the game. Weakness, an aspect of one's position that can be exploited by the opponent, or vice versa. Here we see black is weak on the dark squares, since it has no dark squared bishop and all of his or her pawns are on light squares. Zugzwang, a scenario where one side would rather not make a move at all, since all the legal moves would worsen his or her position, usually a common theme during endgames. Here we see that it's white to move, but white is already on an ideal defensive position. Moving anywhere would allow the black king to capture the pawn and win. Whoa, that was a rush, but it was necessary, since from now on we'll be using proper chess terms when called for. I purposely did not include any tactical terminology because that is a whole different beast that we will tackle on the next video. Last thing we'll talk about today is the principles of chess openings. Many new players go astray and completely misplay the opening, making mistakes they will be unable to recover from. These principles will help you place your pieces on their best squares and get ready for battle. Here they are. Number 1. Control and occupy the center. As you may have guessed, the center is a very important part of the chessboard. It allows pieces to influence more parts of the board and gives them space. In the beginning of the game, you should look to occupy the center with your D and E pawns, and subsequently control it with your other pieces. Number 2. Move minor pieces before major pieces, specifically knights first. Due to their ability to jump over pieces, the knights can come out immediately after the game starts. Also, the knights have only 2 choices they can go to at the beginning, and if we follow the first principle, we'll know that developing the knights towards the center is the obvious choice. The bishops, on the other hand, have a lot more choices after the central pawns have moved, so it is better to wait for more information before committing them to a specific square. Number 3. King safety. Many new players tend to forget this. They go charging on, grabbing all the pawns that they can and forgetting to look after the king. Remember, the objective of chess is to checkmate the opponent's king. So, no matter how much material you've collected, if you get checkmated, you lose. Make sure to castle your king sooner rather than later before attacking. Number 4. Don't move the same piece twice in the opening. Chess is a team effort. Your pieces need the support of each other in order to be successful. You'll find it really hard to win a chess game if you only ever use your queen. So, try to develop all of your pieces first before moving a piece you've already moved. This, of course, within reason. If your opponent attacks your knight with a pawn, obviously you should save the knight even if you have to move it again. With this principle, also try to limit pawn moves to those that really benefit your pieces. For example, f3 doesn't really accomplish a whole lot. It doesn't help any of your pieces' mobility and it doesn't contribute to center control. e4 though opens the door for the light square bishop, opens the door for the queen, occupies the e4 square, and controls the d5 and f5 squares. And last, number 5. Move your pieces actively. There's many ways to start a game, but if you have the option to move a piece with more than one purpose, say to control the center and defend a pawn that's being attacked at the same time, do that instead of mindlessly developing it anywhere. If you follow these principles in the opening, while keeping an eye out for cheesy threats, chances are you'll be just fine for the middle game. Your brain must be a little bit overloaded, but don't worry, with some practice, these concepts will become second nature. I'll include a link on the description of the chess terminology I showed here in case you want to review it at your own pace. And that about covers today's video. If you enjoyed this lesson and would like to see more, make sure to subscribe for more chess content. If you do, click the bell next to the subscribe button so that YouTube actually notifies you of future videos. Also, leaving a like helps the channel a lot, so consider doing that if you think I deserve it. Catch you next time.